Hello. I'm almost there. Hi guys, I am back. Last week I took 3 or 4 days and totally immersed myself in the lawsuit, and then I went to the Federal Trade Commission website, and y'all should do that if you're interested in any of this at all. The Hans Niemann lawsuit, you really should look it up because it is incredible what I found out. But anyway, I immersed myself in all of these things for like 3.5 days, and it so overwhelmed me that I then had to take, which is a normal course for me, but I then took 3-4 days to actually absorb it then and go about my daily business, and had to think about what it was and put pieces together in my head and zone in on what is actually going on. So before I go into Hans's lawsuit and the attorneys that he has representing him, which is not just one firm but 2 firms, and the Federal Trade Commission, I want to first say something about me and what I'm doing. I don't have any social media accounts other than the YouTube account, and I won't have any. In November of 2021, I got on the Silver Arrows site and made comments on there. And then I knew when I decided to leave Silver Arrows that my comments would all just disappear. Everything would just disappear. And so I took copies of everything every time I made a comment, every time I told somebody off, in my strange way that I do that. I'm sneaky that way. But at any rate, since finding out about Hans and his accusation of having cheated because he didn't appear to be nervous, which I outlined in the very first video that I called it that. Sometimes I'll call it a DVD because I'm old enough that my languages get I call them DVDs. So anyway, since I found out about that, I have done a little bit more YouTube, like Lex. I have him, I'm subscribed to him. He did an interview with Hikaru, and that was important for me to look at that. I looked at the interview he did with Levy, and I just looked at a couple of other interviews that I have took snippets from. I watched what I needed to hear or learn, and but anyway, the important thing about Hikaru's was he talked about how he and Magnus had gotten together after a tournament. I don't know how many years ago, but it seems to me it was quite a few years ago. And they went to Magnus's room and they played nonstop chess for hours and hours. And Hikaru talked about how he kind of regretted doing that because what he realized happened was Magnus was able to get a read on Hikaru, and he could find out Hikaru's little nuances and his behavior not behavior modification, but little subtleties in his behavior when he was going to make a move, and etc. So I've decided that although I may know a lot about Hans and can read him like I read myself, I will not talk about the things that I've seen. What I will say about Hans is he's my new semi-hero. He replaces Lewis Hamilton, believe it or not. So go Hans. But I look at the entire character, and I look at their behaviors socially, how their mind operates, especially for introverts. They're my favorite because it takes my mind digging into their mind to see what it is they're up to or not up to. But Hans Niemann is my new semi-hero at this point in time. Okay, so let's get to the nitty-gritty. Let's get to Hans's lawsuit. I went through the whole thing. There's also one of the people that I subscribe to. He actually has an episode where he reads the whole thing out loud. So if you're not into sitting there reading the lawsuit, you can listen to it while you go about other business that you're doing. But this was exceptionally well thought out. This was not a spur-of-the-moment lawsuit by any means. I don't know who actually had the wherewithal to start watching what was happening and putting the pieces together, but kudos to them, because they're as good at this as I am, which is not being egotistical, but I'm very good at what I do. And they match me, and I'll even give them, they might even be a little bit better than me, but I don't know who it is, so I would want to talk to them first. But because this happens so quickly, I think once Magnus stated out loud that Hans was a cheater, and once that started developing its own, what's that word? Not amoeba, its own bacteria, frankly. It was within, wasn't it like 2-3 days, the lawsuit hit. So they were waiting. They had that lawsuit ready, and they were waiting for the moment when that happened. So that's the lawsuit. Go ahead. Everything that's written in there needed to be written in there. And I've heard a few people say that something about that comment about Magnus thinking he's the king or whatever. That's definitely going to be able to be shown in a court of law in front of a jury that that's true. That's not anything to laugh at. That's not put in there for grandiosity. That's not put in there to embellish facts. That's, I won't say what I think it is. So read that and go into that thinking that everything in there is true. Just even if you have to fool yourself, go into it assuming everything in that lawsuit is true. Then go to the Federal Trade Commission website. And what you want to put in, you can either put in the Sherman Act, which will pull that up, but better yet, there's a menu on the side and at the top. Go to the antitrust laws. And when you get to the antitrust page, and this website is very novice friendly. If you don't know a thing about law, you'll be able to figure out what's going on because it's written in exceptionally plain language. And on the left-hand side of the antitrust webpage, you'll find different areas of antitrust law. And the lawsuit was written in the group designation, and that is written, I mean, you'll be able to find that. But as I was reading through the other categories, it would be easy for me to put what's happened to Hans into many of those different categories. So that triggered something in my head at that point. It was like, why did they choose the group one exclusively? So anyway, do that. And it just so happens, the day that I decided to delve into this side of it, the BBC webpage had an article in there on a Department of Justice had made a determination that the big publishing houses, Simon and Schuster, had been trying to merge with Penguin Books. And if you know anything about those two companies, they're both international companies. Simon and Schuster is based in the United States, and Penguin, I think, is based in England. I'm not sure, but and it does say in the article, but I don't recall. But they both are long time businesses. And over the years, they've gobbled up, like little scrubbing bubbles, they've gobbled up little publishing companies. And apparently there was an offer of something like $2 billion. Don't quote me on any of this, because I have too much going on in there to remember exactly numbers and times and things like that. But the DOJ had denied the merger. And it did do, I don't know if there was a jury trial, but Stephen King, the author, had witnessed on behalf of not doing the merger. And so if you get an opportunity, I think it was November 1st, that article was actually on the BBC. If not, just Google it or look it up. I didn't mean to say that word. But you can find that. And it's incredibly similar to Hans's lawsuit. So I read that, and I read the FTC. But also on the FTC page that day, it was incredible, because the very next day they were offering a live day-long conference on, and this is a language I don't understand. It's kind of like if you go to another country and you only know a few words in that language that is spoken in that country. You can pick up things that you recognize, but for the most part, the whole conversation is like, duh. But I did watch it. It was the next day. And I watched the entire thing, and I listened to the entire thing. But what it was on was the need for a lot more discrepancy in algorithms. That there's too much leeway in being able to determine whether or not an algorithm is telling the truth or not. And basically what I got from it was that, in essence, a company like chess.com, when they are trying to scrutinize whether someone was cheating or not, especially in the event that there could be a lawsuit, they need to use at least 3 independent tracking companies that deal with algorithms and things like that. Because otherwise, if they're just using, there's a difference between an internal tracking and an algorithm that can test that stuff, and an outside one. And that's pretty obvious. If you're using an internal engine or an internal algorithm, obviously that can be disputed then. I mean, it's easy to dispute that, as in cheating. You know? So for quality assurance purposes, you should always use multiple companies that do that type of thing. And they didn't bring up this lawsuit or the chess. I mean, this was I keep thinking symposium. It was a conference that was taking place regardless of what was happening in the real world and lawsuits and things like that. So it just happened, the timing was perfect that I did watch that. And there's a woman on there, I don't recall, but you mean all that information's in there. But it seems to me she was a Harvard graduate and perhaps even a Harvard professor. But she goes by Debbie, but I wrote it down, but they have names that I could never pronounce in a million years. So anyway, she brought up examples that were very near to what chess.com is attempting to claim, or did claim, rather. So look that up. That's all really interesting. So let's go now to the two law firms that Hans has gone with here, or that maybe sought him out. I don't know. It depends on who came up with this and was watching it for a minimum of several months before this went down. Somebody out there was putting these pieces together. And it could have been Hans. It would have been easily, it could have been Hans. But so, and the reason that's important is because one of the law firms is based out of Missouri. And if you go to their website, they take contingency only cases. And what a contingency means is that they only get paid if their client wins. Needless to say, if your time and your education and everything in your business's world is important, you're not going to take just any old case. You're not going to take frivolous cases. Because if you take frivolous cases, you don't get paid. So this $100 million lawsuit, this law firm is 100% behind it. This was no joke to them. They truly believe this is possible. And I only say it that way because there's so many of you out there that are naysayers. There's so many of you out there making a big joke out of this. It's no joke. It's no joke at all. So then when you go to the Ovid and Ovid website, holy cats, and that's WHOLLY, right from the opening page, this is an elegant, quality-driven law firm. And they say in there that they only take high-stakes clients. So you have these two fantastic attorney firms backing Hans. Okay, and so now let's go to the next part that I looked into. I looked into chess.com and all the companies that they own. They own, just like Simon & Schuster, they gobbled up all these little companies. And then I went to the Magnus Group, and just like chess.com, they gobbled up all these little chess companies, or chess online. They're both online. They gobbled up all these online. But not only that, they also, at least the Magnus Group, and for those of you who may or may not know, the Magnus Group was founded by Magnus's dad, or his father, and by Magnus. So at some point, they say he's not, what's the word, he's only got like 5% of the stock. But that doesn't matter. Let me see the financials. Because you do not co-found a company and give up majority ownership unless you're paid to. Unless you got bought out, with the exception of you keeping some stock. But then you look at all the things that Magnus Group is in, it is absolutely no different than Simon & Schuster and Penguin Books attempting to merge. Now, I don't know if the DOJ has to be alerted to a case like this. I don't know if they automatically get notified when a merger. I don't know how that business stuff works. Well, what I'm trying to say is, when they decided to merge, does that immediately send an alert to the Department of Justice so that they have to okay it or not okay it? Or do the attorneys, does somebody have to bring this to the attention of the Department of Justice? Well, they know. And I also went ahead and sent some other information to one of the attorneys. But it's absolutely mind-boggling, the attempts that are being made here. So now, check all that out. If you're interested at all in any of this, it's really, really strangely interesting. And I'm laughing because how could anybody think they would get away with this? And that brings me to the psychology of the moving parts. The moving parts are the people involved. So, and hear me out on this, because this is where the psychology part comes in. Theoretically, a lot of these key players, and you know the key players, so I'm not going to name them, the key players in the chess world, that is, they've known each other for years and years. If you go to Hans's Wikipedia and you go to Magnus's Wikipedia, you can see through Magnus's Wikipedia all the names that are very familiar to you through the years, how they've played off each other. They've known each other for 1,000 years, I'll say that. That's not true, obviously, but so they were all around, these players that have known each other for years, before the internet. They've known each other more than 10 years. So when you go back to your childhood years, not you young'uns because you've all grown up on the internet, but those of us that have been around for a lot of years, these were not the popular kids. These weren't the football players, the baseball players, the basketball players, the homecoming kings. I mean, you might have an exception or two, but generally not. These were the nerds. I hate to even use any of that. I hate to call anybody names like that, but these were the ones that pretty much stuck to themselves. They had their own internal worlds going on. I find it difficult to believe that back then a star football player would have been playing chess with any degree of mental anguish in the discipline that it takes to play chess. They might play it for fun, like some people play checkers for fun, or, you know, but that was before the internet. So then I watched the big $1 million thing that went on, and I'm watching these behaviors in these people, and I'll tell you right now, I can see chemicals when they drip in people's brains. I can see behaviors change, and I'm pretty sure a lot of people can do that. But you have people, let me just say this about this lawsuit. There's going to be an awful lot of witnesses that are going to get subpoenaed and or depositions taken by way more than the defendants in this case. And I don't think that's news to either law firm. And if it is, get on it, you guys, because these people know things. And Hikaru, I think it was, talked about, oh, it's been talked about for 2 years. No. I think what you have here is, somebody said something, I read it on one of the, I've been watching Chess 24, the St. Louis Fall Classic. It might have been on there, I don't know. But Hans does not, we call it dance. He doesn't dance the way they do. He isn't all about himself. He isn't all about, look at me, look at me, look at me. He is not hurting for attention. He's not used to being the nerd. He's just used to being him. He doesn't seem to have any scars or if he did have or does have scars, he's handling them very well. Whereas traditionally, people that were considered the nerds were also bullied. So they could very well have scars. They're introverted. They suck into themselves and try to avoid contact, usually. And I'm making some very big generalizations here, and I am using stereotypical behavior, and I'm not that kind of person. But in order to concisely put this somewhere, I've got to use those examples. So I think that's all I really wanted to talk about. I could get further into behaviors and patterns and things like that, but I'm really reticent about what I say because, like Hikaru said, when you have someone analyzing your behavior and putting it out there, what you do and what you say and how, I mean, that gives somebody an edge. Just as Magnus, no doubt, Hikaru was smart enough to recognize what was going on. And he even said in that interview that it took him several years to be able to finally get to a point where he thought he could beat Magnus. That's how critical the psychology of this stuff is, for those of you who may or may not know. I just don't know who I'm talking to. I wish we could all just sit around a big room and I could listen, because I would love to hear what you all thought. As long as you're not raggedly deciding one way or the other. I would not rule Hans out. However, I would really like to see this go to the jury. I would really like to see this play out in court. Because if you're going to be brazen enough in your look at me, look at me, look at me, which a lot of them people are doing right now, it's disgusting in my world. Because remember, I'm the one that doesn't like attention. It's disgusting, and it's actually self-deprecating. Because eventually, when you think you're way up here, and you make it a vocal thing that you're way up here, what is that old, there's an old song that says, be careful who you crap on your way up, because you're going to have to meet them on your way down. So I don't think anybody should be walking around with a narcissistic attitude. And I said that word on purpose. But that's me. And we're judged for behaviors like that. So, I hope you enjoyed this. I have my Chanel loafers on for those of you that want to wonder why I dress so primitively, because I'm at home. I'm at home. My Louis Vuitton hat. My eyes are still there. And thank you to my subscribers. I love you dearly. And I hope we have some fun. It's been kind of... It's oddly damaging to look into things like this to the degree that I must look into them in order to... well, it's who I am. I'm a chess player. You know, that's... I'm always looking for perfection. And perfection is possible, or it could not be defined. And perfection is defined. So, I'll leave you with this. Perfection is doing the absolute best you can do. Even with flaws, even if you lose. Perfection is having a good attitude. Even if you want to ram your fists through the wall, ram it through perfectly. That's how that goes. Thank you, guys. And yes, I'm going to do this right. Maybe.